My daughter-in-law slid a document across the kitchen table like she was doing me a favor. Just a transfer of title, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. It's cleaner this way for the estate. Saves everyone a headache later. My son sat beside her, arms crossed, nodding at nothing in particular. I looked down at the paper. Then I looked at the blue folder I'd set on the counter when I walked in, the one neither of them had asked about. The kitchen smelled like the lemon cleaner my son had always hated when he was small. Said it gave him headaches. Strange, the things you remember. I didn't sign. I said I'd need to read it first. My daughter-in-law smiled the smile of someone who had expected that and had already decided it wouldn't matter. Of course, she said. Take your time. I took my folder and left, and that was the beginning of the end of something I'd spent 30 years trying to hold together. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 68 years old. I taught elementary school for 27 years in a small city outside Ottawa, and I have one son, Jeffrey, who used to bring me dandelions from the schoolyard and who now, apparently, sends his wife to do the difficult conversations for him. Jeffrey married Diane 11 years ago. She was sharp, well-dressed, always 2 steps ahead in any room. I tried to like her. I did like her for a while. She remembered my birthday. She sent Christmas cards with actual handwriting inside, but somewhere around year 4 or 5 of the marriage, she stopped looking at me like I was a person and started looking at me like I was a situation to be managed. My husband, Leonard, died 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 12 weeks from diagnosis to the end. He was 66. We had plans, a trip to Nova Scotia we kept putting off, a garden he was going to properly fence, a kitchen renovation we'd been arguing about, pleasantly for a decade. None of it happened. What happened instead was a Tuesday morning in March when I sat in our bedroom listening to the radiator tick and understood for the first time what silence actually weighed. Leonard had been careful with money his whole life. He grew up without much and never forgot what that felt like. We had the house, fully paid off by the time he was 60, a modest RRSP, and a joint account we'd been building quietly for retirement. He also had a life insurance policy, a good one, that he'd updated regularly. And he had a sister, Rosemary, who lived 40 minutes away in a seniors community in Kanata, and who had no children of her own. Rosemary was 10 years older than Leonard. She had been a librarian, then a branch manager, and she had the organizational precision of someone who had spent decades returning things to exactly where they belonged. We weren't close the way sisters are close, but we were fond. She came for Christmas. She sent postcards from places she'd visited. When Leonard was sick, she drove herself to the hospital twice a week without being asked. After Leonard died, Jeffrey and Diane started coming around more, which should have been a comfort. Jeffrey would fix things around the house, change filters, check the gutters. Diane would bring groceries she knew I wouldn't have thought to buy. It felt like care. I wanted it to be care. The questions started slowly. Subtle at first, just curiosity, Jeffrey said. What did Dad leave for the house? Was there a mortgage? Had I spoken to a financial advisor? And then, not so slowly, had I updated my own will? Had I thought about what would happen to the property when I was gone? Had I considered that managing a house alone at my age was a lot? I was 65. I was not at my age in any way that concerned me. But I smiled and said I'd think about it, because that's what I had always done. Smiled, said I'd think about it, stepped back just enough to keep the peace. Rosemary called me one evening that fall. She'd been having some health trouble, nothing immediately frightening, but enough that she'd been reviewing her own affairs. She wanted to talk, not on the phone, in person, over tea. I drove out on a Saturday afternoon. Her apartment was warm and smelled of the same Earl Grey she'd been buying for 40 years. She sat across from me with her hands around her mug and said, without preamble, "I've been thinking about the property." Rosemary owned a cottage on a lake about 2 hours north of Ottawa. Leonard and I had spent a week there almost every summer for 20 years. We'd fix the dock, paint the shutters, play cards in the evenings while the loons called across the water. It was the kind of place that gets into your bones. "I don't have children," she said, "and I'm not going to pretend I'm going to live forever. Leonard was supposed to be here longer than me." She paused. "I want the cottage to go to someone who loves it, who will actually use it, not sell it." I told her I loved it. I meant it in my whole body. "I know you do," she said. "That's why I already spoke to my lawyer. Your name is going onto the deed. Joint ownership with right of survivorship. Whatever happens to me, it goes directly to you. No probate, no contest, nothing to argue about." I didn't know what to say. She waved her hand as if I'd said something embarrassing. "It's already done," she said. "The papers were filed last week. I just wanted you to know." I drove home in the dark with the radio off, thinking about Leonard, about the dock, about the way the light came through the birch trees in early morning. I didn't tell Jeffrey. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because something in me already understood what that information would become in his house. Maybe because it was mine, just mine, for the first time in a long while, and I wasn't ready to hand it to anyone to examine. 3 months later, Rosemary had a fall, hip fracture, surgery, then a longer recovery than expected. She was moved to a higher level of care, still in Kanata, and she was not unhappy about it. She said the meals were decent, and the staff knew her name. But she wasn't going back to her apartment. Jeffrey heard about the fall from me, said the right sympathetic things, and then asked, carefully, gently, whether Rosemary had a will and whether I was in it. I said I didn't know. He accepted that, but Diane, I noticed, started asking different questions after that, about the cottage specifically. Had I ever been up there? Was it in good shape? What was property like in that area these days? Rosemary passed on a quiet Wednesday in February. She went in her sleep, which felt right for her. No fuss, no performance, just a clean ending to a considered life. The funeral was small. I sat in the front row and thought about every summer on that lake and how Leonard would have held my hand through the whole service. Jeffrey and Diane came to the reception. They were appropriate, kind, respectful. Diane brought a casserole for the gathering afterward. Jeffrey helped stack chairs. 2 weeks later they sat me down in my own kitchen with a document about title transfer. I took my folder and left. That folder had been sitting in my filing cabinet for 3 months. Inside was a certified copy of the deed, Rosemary's letter to me explaining the joint ownership, and a note from her lawyer confirming that the transfer of the property upon her death required no further action. It had already occurred automatically by law. The cottage was mine, had been mine legally since the papers were filed the previous fall. Whatever Jeffrey and Diane thought they were managing nothing. But I didn't say that in the kitchen. I said I needed to read the documents first, and I left, because I have learned in 68 years that the most powerful thing you can do in a room where someone underestimates you is leave it. I called my lawyer the next morning. Her name is Frances, and she has been my lawyer since I bought my first house in 1989. She is 71, still works 4 days a week, and has the calm, precise manner of someone who has seen every possible way one family member can wrong another. I told her about the kitchen meeting, about the document, about Rosemary and the deed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They don't know about the joint ownership." "No." "And they were asking you to sign what, exactly?" "A title transfer for the cottage. Into a family trust," it said. "Jeffrey and Diane listed as trustees." Another pause. "They don't have a claim. The cottage transferred to you automatically. There's nothing to put in a trust, because it's already yours outright." "I know," I said. "So they're either badly informed," Frances said carefully, "or they're hoping you are." I looked out my kitchen window at the yard where Jeffrey had learned to ride a bike. The fence Leonard had built, post by post, one August, when Jeffrey was 11, and they spent the whole weekend arguing companionably about the angle of the gate. "What do I do?" I asked. "Nothing yet," she said. "Let me look at the document they gave you, and in the meantime, don't sign anything." I brought the document to Frances's office that afternoon. She read it in front of me without speaking. Then she set it down. "This is not a simple administrative form," she said. "If you had signed this, you would have transferred your interest in the property into a trust where your son and his wife hold all decision-making power. You would have had no individual rights to the cottage. You could have been voted out of using it. It could have been sold without your meaningful consent." I sat with that for a moment. "They weren't helping me manage my estate," I said. "No," Frances said simply, "they were attempting to take it." I drove home through sleet, the kind that can't decide whether to be rain or snow, which in Ottawa in March feels like an accurate description of most things. The radio played something I didn't hear. I kept thinking about Diane's smile in my kitchen. The careful way she'd said, "Just a transfer of title," the way Jeffrey hadn't quite met my eyes. He used to bring me dandelions, fistfuls of them, yellow and cheerful and already wilting. He'd stand in the doorway of the kitchen with his boots still on and hold them out like they were roses. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was frightened. I was past frightened. It was something quieter and more permanent, the particular grief of understanding that someone you raised has decided your interests don't count. Frances called me 2 days later. She had reviewed the deed, confirmed the joint ownership, and filed a formal record with the county. The cottage was legally, irrefutably mine. She also flagged something she thought I should know. Jeffrey and Diane had contacted a local real estate agent in the area to inquire about lakefront property values. They had done this before coming to me with the document. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call, made tea, didn't drink it, watched the sleet outside become something more definitively snow. Then I opened my address book, actual paper, the kind I've kept since the 1980s, and I found the number for my neighbour's granddaughter, Sylvie. Sylvie is 24, works as a veterinary technician, and lives in a basement apartment in Sentrytown that she has painted a cheerful shade of mustard yellow. She has been coming to my house since she was 7 years old to visit her grandmother next door, and when her grandmother moved to Barrie 2 years ago, Sylvie kept coming anyway. Every few weeks, on no particular schedule, she shows up with something, a book she thought I'd like, a jar of the good honey from the market, once a small succulent she'd been given that she said needed more sunlight than her apartment had. She never stays longer than she's wanted, and she always seems to know when I need company and when I need quiet. She is not related to me by any blood I'm aware of, and she is one of the truest people I know. I called her and said, "I think I need someone to talk to." She said, "I'll bring the good tea." She arrived an hour later with a loose-leaf chai and a paper bag of butter tarts from the bakery on Bank Street. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Diane had slid that document 2 weeks earlier, and I told her everything. Sylvie listened the way she always does, without performing concern, without filling the pauses. When I finished, she looked at me steadily and said, "What are you going to do?" I've already done the legal part, I said. The cottage is protected. Francis has everything in order. Okay, Sylvie said. What about the rest of it? I knew what she meant. The rest of it wasn't legal. The rest of it was Geoffrey. I had been waiting for him to call, to ask how I was, to mention the documents, to offer some version of an explanation. The call didn't come. What came instead was an email, brief, worded like a business communication, asking if I had had a chance to review the paperwork and whether I had any questions. I wrote back 3 sentences. I told him the matter had been referred to my lawyer. I told him all future correspondence regarding property should be directed through her office. I did not ask how he was. I did not sign it, "Love, Mum." Geoffrey called 20 minutes later. He was calm in the way people are calm when they're trying not to show that they aren't. "I think there may have been a misunderstanding," he said. "There wasn't," I said. A pause. "We were trying to help you manage things. At your age, property can be complicated." "Geoffrey," I said, "I am 68. I have owned property since before you were born. I taught 30 years' worth of children how to read. Please do not tell me about complication." Silence. "Rosemary put my name on the deed," I said. "Last October. The cottage transferred to me automatically when she passed. Your lawyer, if you consulted one, would have told you there was nothing to manage." Another silence, longer this time. Then, "We didn't know that." "No," I said. "You assumed." He did not respond to that. "You assumed," I continued, "that I would sign a document I didn't understand, because I usually do what I'm asked, because I've spent the last 4 years trying not to be a burden, and that apparently looked like permission." Mom, I'm not finished, and I wasn't. I know you've been in contact with real estate agents. I know what lakefront property is going for up there. I understand what this was." The silence that followed had a different quality, heavier. "I'm not going to fight you," I said. "That's not what this is. But I need you to hear me clearly. The cottage is mine. My affairs are being handled by Francis. If you or Diane contact me about property again without going through her, I will take that as a confirmation that this relationship is not something you value, and I will act accordingly." He said he needed time to think. I said, "Take all the time you need." I hung up and sat there in the quiet of my kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The radiator clicked. Outside, a chickadee landed on the feeder Leonard had hung from the eave and immediately left again, apparently unsatisfied. I understood the feeling. Diane called 2 days later. Geoffrey had not called back. She was warmer on the phone than I expected, which made me more careful, not less. She said she was sorry for the confusion. She said the documents had been prepared by an advisor who, she now realized, hadn't been given the full picture. She said Geoffrey was embarrassed and didn't know how to say so directly. I believed some of that. I believed Geoffrey was embarrassed. I did not particularly believe the rest of it. I said, "I appreciate you calling." She said, "We love you. We want what's best for you." I said, "I know, and I meant it the way you mean something true that is also incomplete. They did love me, probably, in the architecture of their lives where I occupied a particular shape, but love that wants to manage you is a different thing from love that wants to know you. I had spent years being managed. I was done with that now." Francis filed the final documents the following week. The cottage deed was recorded in my name alone. She also helped me update my own will, something I had been putting off since Leonard died, and prepare a power of attorney, properly structured, naming Sylvie as my representative for decisions if I were ever unable to make them myself. When I told Sylvie, she went still in that way she has. Then she looked at me very directly and said, "Are you sure?" "You come," I told her, "every few weeks without being asked. You bring honey and books and sometimes succulents that need more light. You have never once asked me what I'm worth." I paused. "Yes, I'm sure." She said, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said. "Just keep coming." Sylvie told me later that she'd cried in her car before she drove away. I didn't know that at the time. I was inside making a grocery list. Geoffrey came by the house on a Saturday in April. No Diane, just him in the old jacket he'd had since university, the navy one with the broken zipper he'd never replaced. He stood on the porch without ringing the bell, which is how I knew he wasn't sure he'd be let in. I opened the door before he knocked. He looked like a man who had rehearsed something and then forgotten it. "Hi, Mum," he said. "You're not in that jacket because you're confident," I said. "Come in." He sat at the kitchen table. They all end up at that table eventually, and I made coffee, the proper kind, because whatever this conversation was going to be, it deserved decent coffee. He wrapped his hands around the mug. For a moment he looked very much like Leonard. That jaw, that particular way of being uncomfortable with himself, it made me sad in a way that had nothing to do with anger. "I didn't know about the deed," he said. "I know." But I knew Diane was. I knew the advisor had suggested. He stopped. I let it happen. I didn't ask enough questions. "No," I said. "I think I convinced myself it was practical, that we were helping." He looked up. "But I also knew you wouldn't have thought of it as help, and I let Diane make the approach anyway." I held my coffee mug. The maple tree outside the window was just starting to bud. Leonard had planted it the year Geoffrey was born, said it would be good for shade when the boy was old enough to play outside. "You've been scared since your father died," I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just true. He nodded barely. "So have I said, but scared doesn't make it right." He was quiet. "I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen," I said. "I'm also not going to cut you off for it. You're my son. But things are different now. My affairs are my affairs. My lawyer handles what she handles. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be built on the real thing, not on what you think you're owed or what you're afraid of losing." He said, "I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it in one conversation," I said. "You just start. You show up. You stop sending Diane to do the hard parts." He nodded again, slower this time. We talked for another hour about things that had nothing to do with property. His job, which had been stressful. A trip he and Diane were thinking about, to see her family in New Brunswick. The maple tree outside, which I mentioned had been planted the year he was born. He didn't know that. He looked at it differently after I told him. When he left, he hugged me on the porch. It lasted longer than our hugs usually do. I watched his car pull away and stood in the cool April air for a while. I wasn't thinking about property or documents or what came next. I was thinking about dandelions and about how even imperfect things can be offered with a full heart, and how that has to count for something, even when it's not enough. There was still the question of what to do with the cottage. I drove up on a Friday in late May, alone, the first time I'd been there since before Leonard died. The drive took 2 hours and 18 minutes, and I stopped once for coffee at a Tim Hortons outside of Arnprio, which Leonard would have considered mandatory. The cottage was smaller than memory. They always are. The dock needed a new board on the far end. The shutters were faded. There were leaves from last fall still piled in the corners of the porch because no one had come to sweep them. But the lake was the same, that particular northern Ontario blue that shifts with the cloud and the time of day, that looks silver at 6 in the morning and almost green by afternoon. I sat on the dock for a long time, long enough that a family of mergansers swam past and didn't seem bothered by me. Rosemary had left a jar of instant coffee in the cupboard and a tin of Scottish shortbread almost full. I made coffee on the old percolator, ate 3 pieces of shortbread, and sat at the kitchen table inside while the afternoon light moved across the floor. I thought about what I wanted to do with this place. I thought about Jeffrey, who had visited it maybe 4 times in his adult life. About Diane, who had never once asked me what it meant to me, only what it was worth. About Sylvie, who had never seen it, but who I thought would love the mornings. I decided I would keep it, for now. I would come back in August, the way Leonard and I always had, and I would open the windows and replace the board on the dock and listen to the loons. I would invite Sylvie if she wanted to come. I would not invite the conversation about what it all meant. Some things don't need meaning extracted from them. Some things are just yours, and the point is simply to use them. On the drive home, I called Frances. "How was it?" she asked. "Good," I said. "Really good." "Have you thought any more about the bequest?" I had been turning it over since February. I wanted to leave something to Sylvie. Not everything. I had other things I wanted to do with other pieces of what Leonard and I had built. But something real, something that would give her options she didn't currently have. "Yes," I said. "I want to move forward, whatever makes it cleanest and most protected." "I'll draft the trust documents this week," she said. "Thank you, Frances. That's what I'm here for." I drove home through the Shield, through the pines and the rock cuts and the last of the afternoon light. The radio played something quiet, and the road was clear, and I was 68 years old and in better shape than I had been in 4 years, not in my body, which had its usual complaints, but in my chest, where the weight had been sitting since the morning. I understood that a person can be loved and still not be seen. Sylvie came by on a Tuesday evening 2 weeks later. She brought honey and a library book she thought I might like, and a beeswax candle from a vendor at the carp farmer's market. She came in without ceremony, put the kettle on without asking, and sat at the table while I finished the sentence I'd been reading. We talked about the cottage. I told her I'd been up. She asked what the lake looked like. "Come in August," I said. "See for yourself." She smiled. "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your space." "Sylvie," I said, "you have never intruded on anything in your life." She laughed, which is a sound that reminds me of what ease feels like. I told her then, not everything but enough, that I had updated my will, that there was a trust being prepared, that she was in it, not because she had done anything to earn it, but because she showed up, because she paid attention. Because after Leonard died and Jeffrey retreated into management and the house got quiet in the wrong way, she had kept coming with her books and her honey and her certainty that I was still worth visiting. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't do those things for this." "I know," I said. "That's why." She looked down at her tea. I could see her trying to find the right words and deciding that words were the wrong tool. "It's not a reward," I told her. "It's a recognition there's a difference." She nodded, still looking at the table. Then she looked up. "I'll come in August," she said. "Good," I said. We finished our tea. She helped with the dishes. She left just after 8, and I stood at the window watching her walk down the front path, the same path Jeffrey had run down 1,000 times, the same path Leonard had shoveled every winter without complaint. The house was quiet, but it was the right kind of quiet now, the kind that isn't empty, that just has room in it, finally, for everything that actually matters. I don't believe in tying everything up neatly. Life doesn't do that. Jeffrey and I are still finding our way back to something real, and I don't know how long that will take, or exactly what shape it will have when we arrive. Diane has been careful and courteous since April, whether that's a change or a strategy I'm watching. What I know is this: I spent a long time making myself easy to manage, easy to reassure, easy to set aside, easy to underestimate, And I told myself it was kindness, that I was keeping the peace, holding the family together, but the peace I was keeping wasn't peace. It was just the absence of my own voice. I'm done with that now. If you've stayed with me this long, maybe you recognize something. Maybe you've had the document slid across the table. Maybe you've smiled at the smile that doesn't reach the eyes and told yourself you're imagining things. Maybe you've been the quiet one, the one who steps back, the one who keeps the dandelions in a glass, even after they've wilted, because it felt unkind to throw them out. You don't have to be that person anymore. You can read the documents, you can call the lawyer, you can say no without explaining why, and yes without apologizing for it, and enough without needing anyone's permission to mean it. That's what Rosemary knew, I think, when she filed those papers without telling me first. She didn't ask if I deserved it, she just made sure it was done. I try to live like that now, quietly, deliberately, with a folder ready just in case. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me about your Rosemary or your Sylvie or the table where someone slid you a paper and waited to see what you'd do. I read every one. I keep thinking about the moment Diane slid that document across my kitchen table, the way she smiled, the way Jeffrey looked at the wall instead of at me, and I think about how, 4 years ago, I would have reached for that pen. Not because I was foolish, because I had spent so long believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as being good, that stepping back was generosity, that saying yes when I meant no was a kind of love. It wasn't. It was just habit dressed up as virtue. What changed wasn't one thing. It was a slow accumulation. Leonard's death, the silence that followed, the questions that started coming a little too often and a little too specifically. And underneath all of it, Rosemary quietly filing papers at a county office without making a fuss about it, without asking whether I deserved it, without needing me to thank her first. She just made sure I was protected. That's a kind of moral clarity I'm still learning from. She knew what was right, and she did it. No announcement, no drama, just the thing itself done properly. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to do what Rosemary did, what it takes to do what I eventually did, sitting across from my son and telling him the truth, instead of smoothing it over. It's not about being hard, it's not about winning. It's about something quieter, the willingness to know what you know and act on it, even when acting on it is uncomfortable, even when it costs you something. Jeffrey was scared. I understand that now better than I did in April. When Leonard died, something in my son shifted, and fear moved into the space where security had been. Fear makes people reach for control. It doesn't excuse what he allowed to happen, but it explains it, and understanding it is what allowed me to keep the door open. Not all the way, not yet, but open. Because cutting him off entirely would have been easier than what I actually wanted, which was to be known by my own child as someone worth knowing. That takes a different kind of strength than anger. Anger is fast and clean. Staying present, staying honest, staying willing to be disappointed again. That's the slower, harder work. Sylvie does it without thinking about it. She just shows up. She just pays attention. I'm 68 years old, and I'm still learning how to do that as naturally as she does. What I know now is that the way we treat each other accumulates. Every time I said yes when I meant no, I taught the people around me that my no didn't exist. Every time Rosemary made a quiet, careful decision in someone else's interest, she taught the people around her what genuine care looked like. We are always teaching something. The question is whether we're paying attention to the lesson. I was not always paying attention. I am paying attention now. The folder is still on my counter. I don't need it the way I did in February, but I like seeing it there. It reminds me that being prepared isn't the same as being suspicious. that protecting yourself is not a failure of love, that a woman who knows what her name is on is not someone you can easily erase. Rosemary knew that. I'm glad she taught me before she left.